why don't we start with the minutes from last? Did she give you some or not?
Potentially.
Yeah, I did. Oh, I'm sorry, John.
Sucker works.
There.
Used it in feelings.
You were in the wrong seat over there. I didn't see you. Okay. February 12th.
You want me up here with you, but I'll sit. Yeah, sure, absolutely. The more the merrier, right?
Yeah.
He made no little drive. No, sir.
This way, when you throw things at you, you can see them coming.
Yes, sir.
I have a motion to accept the minutes from Wednesday, February 12th.
Well,
Make a motion that we accept the minutes of Wednesday, February 12th,
Have
2020.
to do a red screen cross.
Second.
Let me play with this.
Discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Well, we want to welcome the Mendon Regional School District for here tonight to give a presentation on the budget proposal for the upcoming fiscal year.
Well, it's great to be here. Good seeing you, gentlemen, once again.
Thank you. Good, thank you.
Good to see you.
Nice to see you.
For the official record.
thank you.
So, again, thank you for having us here this evening. What I'm going to do, as I do typically each year, is kind of give a high-level overview with some details about the FY21 budget that is still being worked on. Actually, it's probably wiser, Jay, to move that a little bit closer so that, yeah, the majority of there you go. Okay, maybe a little to your right, my left. Perfect.
Want me to stay behind you for
No, it's okay. But a kind of a high-level overview of what our projected revenue is and what our drivers are, as I do typically each year. I would like to start, in talking about our strategic plan, which was put into place in 2018. We're now a year and a half into it, and we always keep in our sights our mission statement, which is very, very concise. We empower all learners to thrive. So as a district of 162 teachers and a total staff of 305 individuals, our mission is very, very clear around meeting the needs, the academic, but also social emotional needs of our over 2,300 learners within the district. And we take a lot of pride in the work, and as I'll talk about a little bit later, the many accomplishments and achievements and the success that the district has enjoyed in recent years, due in part to the support from both of our communities. I had one of these aha moments, and I'm sure you guys get it too from time to time, when it was January 1st, 2020, and you're like, oh, okay, we're in a new decade. And somebody shortly after the first of the year said, yeah, 1995, and in the same sentence said, that was 25 years ago. I was like, holy crap, that was 25 years ago. Like, oh my God. And if you think about, and these are actually pictures out of the Nipmuc and MISCO yearbooks from 1995. And when you look at some of these pictures, I see kids that, I guess they're candidates. They're not necessarily really candidates, but they're happy, that they're successful. I'm sure they were doing well. But you probably also notice that they're in very traditional desks, that are in very traditional rows. And they were probably getting a very traditional education. And not that there was anything wrong with that in 1995, but I think it's a snapshot of how much things have changed in 25 years in thinking about the skills, both hard skills, soft skills, the habits of mind, and the knowledge that's needed for careers of today, many of which don't even, and thinking about when the kids that we have in front of us will be out in the workforce, careers that don't even exist yet. And I think about the classrooms of today, and if you were to go in any of our 4 schools, you'll very rarely see any desks in the traditional neat little rows. You won't see teaching where, the teacher's up in the front lecturing, and you see a lot of collaborative, problem-solving, kids working with technology in a very purposeful manner. And really, again, that's part of our strategic plan, and I think that's been part of our success in creating students, creating graduates that are ready for the workforce. They're ready for colleges and beyond. And we take a lot of pride in that work. But again, one of those aha moments of the demands that we have of our kids today, academically, but also social emotional needs, are dramatically different even versus 25 years ago. And again, maybe it's just a me thing, but to me, 1995 doesn't seem like that long ago.
You still have books?
We still have books, but I realize at the secondary level, a lot of them are on kids' iPads. They're digital texts, which are constantly being renewed. So as I do every year, one of the things that we always take a look at as far as a driver is the enrollment. Our official October 1st enrollment is 2,283 students. You see the breakdown as far as how that breaks down from our 2 communities. Over the last 5 or 6 years, it's almost been, it's changed by literally hundredths of a percentage point. It's pretty much been a 55-45 split between our 2 towns. We are anticipating a 1-year blip where it will go down by approximately 20 students next school year. And what we use, and I'll show some more slides, is an organization known as NESDEC, which gives us our enrollment projections each and every single year. As you can see, we also track very carefully our average class sizes, again, on a running 5-year basis. And if you take a look at this, you can see our elementaries are identical at a little bit more than 20 kids per classroom. NISCO, which has the efficient scheduling, is about 24 kids per class, and NIPMUC is about 23 kids per class overall as far as average class sizes. So kind of unique, and I think this is some of our success in our 2 towns and in the regional school district, but the enrollment projections are projecting actually an upward slope in enrollment over the next 10 years of approximately 300 students. And in fact, in the next 5 years, and the 5-year projections tend to be the better projections, it's projected to go up 130. And the kind of interesting piece behind this is about 90% of that is coming from Upton. It's not coming from Mendon. So when you break down this projection by Upton, you can see, what is that, approximately 270 of the 300 are coming out of Upton, and then Mendon, you're talking about a gain of about 30 over that 10-year span. Why is that? It is looking at birth rate, okay, and so the kids that we will have in front of us as kindergartners at Clough and at Memorial starting in September, generally speaking, were born in 2015. So if you look at that blue line, which represents the birth rate, you see it's a very, very narrow decline, but you can see after 2015 going into 2016, a spike, okay? It's not a perfect correlation as far as our kindergarten enrollment, but over the last 3 years or so, we've pretty much kept the doors locked as far as not taking in choice. And, for Clough alone, we're taking in pretty much strictly Mendon children. So we're anticipating beyond next year actually an increase in enrollment. And here's another little bit of a wild card that NESDEC doesn't necessarily take into account, but this is a project right on 140. It's 169 Main Street. It's a unit, part of the unit is affordable housing. 44 units in total. I believe something like 15 of them are affordable housing, and mostly 2- and 3-bedroom apartments. They're starting to rent these in June. I've got a real concern about what this, how this could impact Memorial Elementary School. So our initial budget proposal, we're fully cognizant is a sizable ask, but it is a proposal that is $38,952,699, which is a 6.97% increase from this current fiscal year. Once again, we start with maintaining what we have in place, with maintaining level services. But again, some real critical needs, and if you recall my presentation from last year, there'll probably be nothing in here. Hi, Heather. Nothing in here that should be surprising, because these are some of the same exact needs that we had last year.
We have more of these, right?
Absolutely. So it maintains, actually, if you could leave just one for me, Jay, that would be great. It maintains keeping our class sizes intact, and really, as you'll see, some of our critical needs that we're requesting is building upon our priority of social emotional learning supports and inclusionary practices to meet the needs of all learners. So as I do every year, just kind of looking at drivers, we are in the process of negotiating with all 5 of our associations. But at this point in time, we've taken a look at our contractual pieces as far as the steps and lanes that we've reserved, that we have to contractually, no matter what the status is of the contract, and we've also put in some for reserve for salary increases. So that line overall for all employees across the district is $553,231. We are also still in negotiation with Harvard Pilgrim Health on our insurance. There's been some challenges in some of the drivers where we are with now with some of our employees, but we're still aggressively negotiating that. Plus, we've also had situations where some of our employees, because of change in life situations, have gone from individual plans to family plans, or have changed to PPOs because they've moved over the border, things of that sort. So we have right now a fairly high number, a little under 12% increase, and we're hoping to get that down.
How many different health plans do we offer?
One.
And have we looked into a consumer-driven health plan or a high-deductible health plan versus
We
a
already have a
PPO?
$1,333,000 deductible per plan currently.
I-
We don't have a higher deductible, but the deductible is $1,503,000.
So have we looked into that as an option?
Higher deductible?
Yeah.
Yeah, we will. Well, we're still working on getting rates on this. but
I mean,
we
it just
will.
seems to be that's the trend in kind of, in public companies that move it to those high-deductible health plans, either multi-level high-deductible health
We have to
plans.
collectively bargain it, though. We can't just arbitrarily do it.
I understand, I'm just asking, have we looked into it and what the
Yeah.
cost savings might
Yeah,
be
we'll-
for something like that?
I think it's very safe to say we're aggressively looking at a lot of different options.
Okay.
I mean, I'm looking at self-insurance as an option, because that's another one that would save you some money, but there's some caveats to that with the Department of Revenue that make it not always that great.
Okay. Yep.
I think probably, I don't know the numbers for the town of Mendon, but unfortunately, I think we're looking at our third straight year of approximately a 10% increase in the Worcester County retirement assessment for our employees that are not part of the Massachusetts Teachers Retirement Association. We're locked into a new 3-year contract with Telstone and Sons, which is our transportation provider for regular transportation. So a 6.54% increase there. And then special ed transportation, which would be encompassing of our transportation of students who have out-of-district placements, but then also our preschool program, and then also for our students in the over 18 program, students with significant disabilities who are still in district at Nipmuc for job placements. So that also is a challenge, as you can see, just the increase, and part of that is just the lack of providers that are available here in the greater Milford area. Charter school tuition, that's also a big driver in the sense that we've gone in 1 year from 6 students in our 2 communities accessing charter schools to 12 students. So as a regional school district, we have to subsume that cost. We have a minor decrease in out-of-district tuitions for students with some significant needs. Building and grounds overall is a 7% increase, but we have a real concern with one of our 2 burners at Nipmuc. They're both the original burners to the building, now 22 years old. And how would you describe how we've got one of them?
Yeah, the issue, actually, it's happening to both, is the boilers keep cracking, we keep welding them, they keep cracking, we keep welding them. The company that makes them comes out and says this never happens, but it keeps happening. So we just had one down last week that we had to weld again. Eventually, they're gonna have to be replaced because you can't weld when there's nothing left to weld to. I'd say they each have been welded probably a half a dozen times over the last 10 years. So that's been a challenge for us as far as that goes. And I'm actually looking at, you know, a Mass MSBA grant, because they do have some grants, to see if we can do something with them. The problem is that those grants, you have to be over 20 years old, and we are exactly at 20. We're not over it yet. So we applied for one last year, and they rejected it for that reason, and they're going to reject it again this year.
But it gets you in the queue.
Yeah, so we're going to have to do that. But that's been a challenge.
So as far as textbooks and instructional supplies, really simply two drivers here. For our elementary students, it's a renewal of, in 2013, we changed our literacy series to a program known as Reading Wonders. They've had some upgrades in the series, some of which is technology-based, because a lot is done in the classroom using a smart board with interactive tools for the kids. So the plan is to upgrade to the latest version of that. And we also, kind of to answer your question before, we have the majority of our textbooks at the middle school and the high school are on the iPad. So there's renewal of leases. So we have a 2-year renewal coming up for all of our high school math texts. So every single math course renewing those texts. And then as far as technology lines, an overall investment of about $60,000 for purchase of various apps and hardware. A lot of it, though, going at the elementary level. We're finding more and more, you know, we don't have one-to-one with kids in K through 4, but a lot of times they're working in centers. And a lot of, particularly, we get a lot of feedback around the math instruction, where a lot of the manipulatives and things that they can do with hands-on, they're also doing with various applications. So we'd like to make an investment in that piece. So some of the critical needs, and I know just about everybody around this table was at this table last year, but we, again, have a real critical need for school psychologists. We do not have a school psychologist at all in the district. As you guys know, I think schools are a microcosm of society. I think there's a lot of stress in society. There's a lot of mental health issues. And we're seeing more and more challenging situations, with children, and particularly with younger children. So included in this request is 2 FTEs, 2 full-time equivalent school psychologists, but realize the net would be $65,000 because right now we have a line where a lot of the work is being contracted out in working with some challenging kids and also doing psychological assessments of students.
Are these all-in costs or just salary costs?
Those are salary costs.
So currently we have 0?
0.
So what's the reasoning for going to 2 versus 1?
The reasoning would,
Services.
so the reason would be going with 2 for the 2 schools in Mendon and 2 for the 2 schools in Upton. I'm sorry, 1 each. I think even with 2, quite frankly, Norm, is going to be stretching it.
Okay.
That in a perfect world, we would have a school psychologist in each of our 4 buildings.
And while there's no salary now, but there's $95,000 you're paying in contracted service, so you replace the.
Correct.
We're actually reducing the contract
Right.
line by
Right.
90,000. There's still some other contracted services that are going to be out there, because even these 2 won't be able to do everything.
So with the 2, we'll get more hours per se than the contracted services?
In my humble opinion, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Second position there is an elementary special ed team chair that would be housed at Clough Elementary School. Again, we're seeing more needs to manage special education, more needs with helping out with not only the managing of the team process, but also working with teachers to ensure, accommodations are clearly understood and are being implemented with fidelity in the classroom and so on. So that would put us in a situation where we would have a team chair in all 4 buildings, which, again, I think is desperately needed. Last year, to meet our budgetary needs based upon the revenue, we reduced 4 FTEs in total. And 2 of those FTEs that were reduced were the library media specialists, both at MISCO and at Nipmuc. Right now, we're using a para-educator to basically cover the library. The concern is our high school, like the overwhelming majority of high schools, is accredited by NEASC, which is the New England Association of Schools and Colleges. Part of its accreditation standards states for the standard of school resources for learning that you're supposed to have a certified library media specialist on staff, So right now, there's a real concern with regard to our accreditation status with NEASC about not having that position. So one of the 4 FTEs that's included in this proposal is the restoration of that position. So when we start the budget process in November, these are all of the positions that were requested. I believe it's something in the ballpark of about 21 FTEs, and you can see things like math coaches, literacy coaches, but also additional special educators, things like school adjustment counselors, engineering teachers, English teacher, technology teacher, restoration, and so on, and realize none of these positions are in the proposal for the simple reason that this would drive the proposal sky high, quite frankly. But I say these things, I call this first to the attention of the school committee, but now to your attention, to make the simple point that these are also things that are critical needs that are coming grassroots from our teachers who are working with our students, but also our principals and our district leadership team. So the anticipated revenue, this is, again, continues to be super, super challenging, to say the least. I wish I could come here tonight with much more optimistic news, but once again, we are considered to be a hold harmless district. So a minimum aid district for the simple reason of, and I'll get into the details, but the whole conversation around target share. So as a result, we are receiving $30 additional per student in Chapter 70 aid, which is the primary funding mechanism. So that translates to $65,310 increase, which is a whopping 0.52% in state aid. Sometimes we've had situation with, as we go through the budget season further, for example, in April when the House budget comes out, and then May and June, where there's an improvement in that. However, with this new legislation, the Student Opportunity Act, which I'll talk about in a couple of minutes, we've been told it's going to stay static at $30 per kid. Very modest increase, 1.72% in regional transportation reimbursement. However, we got also an increase in charter reimbursement of about $31,000. However, that's offset by the increase of the 6 kids and the tuition. So you can see the total net increase of 20 is, less than 0.2% or 23,603. So before I go to the local assessment, I'll also talk about what also makes this very, very challenging this year. We usually have more to contribute from district receipts, okay? Again, E&D or excess and deficiency, which is our typical like free cash. To make things work last year, we hit that a little bit heavier as we did the past year. So our most current certification is right around $400,000, correct?
Yeah.
$400,000. So we can't, in good faith, access anything from that. So last year it was $300,000 from district receipts. Now it's zero, unfortunately. Hi, Mike.
Good evening. Sorry.
How are you?
Sorry I'm late.
No, it's great.
We already got through the hard stuff.
Yeah, we're just taking questions then. No. So as you can see, that's $300,000 less than last fiscal year. So again, with just operational increases, the total increase in local assessments to both of our communities is a little over $2.7 million. I should point out again, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit more, again, just the minimum local contribution increase to Mendon is a little under $500,000, $491,828, and to Upton, it's $469,452. So again, we fully realize that this, once again, we're in the situation where we're putting a tremendous amount of onus on our two communities. I do want to point this out because I've had many conversations within the community where there's this perception, because it got a lot of play, about Governor Baker signing this landmark law known as the Student Opportunity Act. And just in the first year alone, and it's a 7-year implementation, but just in the first year alone, $304 million in Chapter 70 aid is included in the governor's budget. Please realize that this is a bill that is heavily weighted toward communities that have English language learners and have economically disadvantaged students. So fact, 80% of that 304 million has gone to 35 districts. So my friend Kevin McIntyre down Route 6 in Milford is getting an additional 4.9 million just in Chapter 78 alone. The city of Worcester, just in Chapter 78 alone, is getting 18 million additional, okay? We unfortunately are part of that 57% that are getting that additional $30 per kid, and for the foreseeable future, we'll be getting $30 per kid.
I just see, what was Milford getting? I saw some huge number yesterday or something.
Well, it's an additional, it's a net of 4.9 million.
Oh, in Milford?
Millbury?
Milford.
Milford is 4.9 million.
Oh, is that what you just said? I thought.
Did I say Millbury? I'm sorry.
I thought you said down
Milford.
on Route 6 or something like that.
No, I said down Route 16.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Gotcha.
So it's challenging, and, in my humble opinion, of course, I want to see disadvantaged communities receive more funding, but sometimes it seems like the pendulum has swung a little bit too extreme in one direction. But I thought it's important to point that out because that might be in the purview. If you look on the handout that I gave you, I believe this mirrors page 2 of just the funding sheet that we usually put forward, and you could see the overall increase to, again, the first draft of this budget, an increase of $2,537,940. And you can see what the minimum local contribution comes out to be, but overall, in the operational budget, the increase to Mendon being a little bit under $1.3 million. And then the debt service built in. And again, this is just the continuation. And you can see under the point under school district receipts, again, that loss of 300,000 out of excess and deficiency because we can't, in good conscience, allocate that. So again, just as a reminder around target share, but target share directly feeds into the minimum local contribution, and it has to do with the state's tweaking of the funding formula, and it's based upon two things that determine how much any given community across the Commonwealth should contribute to public education. It's one, looking at your aggregate property values, and then also your aggregate personal income levels. Realize, again, target share is changed every single year. So I'll show you in a second. So in total, as far as the sum total across the state, across all 351 communities, the goal is that the local coverage is 59% of school budgets, and state aid should cover 41%. So you see all of our neighboring communities and what their target share is for the coming fiscal year. So you see on the low end, Milford with 46%, and let's see now, Westboro and Hopkinton at 82.5%. And realize that's the high, that's the cap. And I believe there's 157 communities that are at the cap. So again, looking at where our two communities are, they're now pushed up. Mendon is now a little under 78.5%, and Upton is a little under 76% for their target share. So again, that's the percentage that, according to the state funding formula, communities should be contributing to all kids in the district, all kids that go to public education. So keep in mind, as a reminder, that would be the lion's share is the Mendon Upton Regional School District, but also BVT counts towards that, and the small handful of kids that go to Norfolk Aggie as well. So you can see both communities are still behind the shortfall. They basically, in the funding formula, say, okay, what did you actually contribute for the current fiscal year? So the good news is Mendon's at 75%, Upton is lower, Upton is a little farther away from the target share than Mendon, but I've seen it flip-flop from year to year. But again, target share is what determines a community's MLC increase from year to year. So, kind of interesting. I thought I'd put this together. This is my 9th budget presentation to you guys, and I created this graphic. It's not the best graphic, but it shows over time what has happened to target share in the 9 years that I've been here. As you can see, the green represents Mendon and Upton, and the blue represents how much the state is contributing to the budget. So you can see back in FY12, we were, around 60%, and you see how it's progressively going up and up. And it really comes down to, like many, many communities across the Commonwealth, the state is basically saying, look, the state is not going to be funding increases in education and is putting the onus on the local communities.
They're just not gonna fund increases in communities like Mendon.
Exactly. Absolutely. So, both myself, Jay, and our school committee realized that this is, once again, a very large ask. It's on parallel with where we were in 2015. And we fully realized that, this is, in all likelihood, a request for a Proposition 2.5 operational override. But to put things in perspective, even if each community were to meet the increase in minimum local contribution, and we're fully cognizant that even that's a stretch given projected revenue, even with the local contributions being met, or those MLC increases being met, we still would have a potential shortfall of about $1.8 million. So what is that $1.8 million? Well, obviously, the 4 requested additional positions, which are critically needed, would not be restored. And I think we'd be easily looking at layoffs in the magnitude of about 25 to 30 students. Staff. We can't lay kids off. That's problematic. So obviously the implications of that are significant increases in class sizes and then reduction of programs. And again, you have to keep your academic core intact to the best of your ability. So you obviously would start with some of the elective areas. Mike?
How does Mendon's and Upton's target share percentage compare to other regional school districts in the Commonwealth?
Well, target share is by town. So it's...
How many towns have a regional school district, and what are their target shares?
They vary based upon the relative wealth of the community, but to go back to this slide, Mike, that's a snapshot of all of our regional in our surrounding area. My gut is, and we talked about this extensively at the school committee level, we're going to be there. I guarantee you, we will be at that cap of 82.5%. If I was a betting man, definitely within the next 5 years. They're pushing us in that direction. And we can have a very honest, great debate about people being land rich or, that type of thing. But that's
it's all a moot point because the state's gonna, unless the state is here to listen, there's no point in even discussing.
The only way is to change the way that they calculate the formula or the ability to pay, maybe with a more realistic, you know,
Well, they're
set of
look-
facts like commercial property versus residential
But they're
property.
looking at aggregate property wealth and aggregate income wealth. Mendon is considered a very affluent town. It's one of the top affluent towns in the state. It's not considered a poor town.
And that's understandable, we can sit here and argue the state level of this, but when you compare it to Milford, the income level drastically decreases because of the illegal immigration that's going on, and
Correct.
and
And they're
now
getting
you're
the
filling
funding
those
for it.
schools with these students, which I guess you gotta give them an education, but where, there's a disconnect here that's way far more than what we can handle, and that we're gonna fix in this room, but it comes down to a town like Milford filling up with the population there, and
You know, the issue.
and
is-
driving those numbers
The
down.
issue is not that. The issue has a particular community's ability to pay. The problem is we don't have the ability to pay because we don't have the tax base that Milford does for the signs.
So-
I mean, it's the commercial piece. That's the real rub. If they would rework their formula, looking at how much towns can contribute based on the commercial, mix, the commercial residential mix, it would completely change the formula, and it wouldn't put us behind the 8 ball. But
How many
But I-
regional school districts are there in the state?
There's quite a few. Off the top of my head, I want to say it's like 55, Mike.
But to say that isn't the driving factor in Milford, whether or not they're using the commercial base or not, the income is driven down in Milford based upon what I had said previously.
But also part of the funding formula, to your point, part of the funding formula is if you have a student who is in Milford who just came here from Brazil, he or she is considered to be an English language learner, and there's a premium that's applied to that student versus a kid who lives down the road in Mendon.
Seems like a good investment.
Yeah, so Mike, I'm trying to look up different towns that are part of regional, so the first one that came to mind was King Philip, so that's Rentham. Rentham's at 82.5%. I'm trying to think of other towns, like I know Neshoba is another one,
for the town.
Blackstone, Millville, well, Blackstone, let me look them up.
When they have a bigger ability to pay.
Blackstone is at 47.92%.
Wilbraham, Hamden is a regional,
Yeah, well, I know, right?
Wilbraham?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying.
kind of comparable to Mendon.
Yeah. I'd say they're probably, Western Mass tends to be a little bit lower.
Funding formula is based on, right, the property values.
Property value.
65.7.
Property
Wilbraham.
values and aggregate income.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's become a double-edged sword in town.
That's right.
We have this fabulous school district, and it is.
Yeah.
So that is drawing people, I mean, they're in my office all the time, and why do they want to come to Mendon? They want to go to that school district.
That's right.
So they come here and they drive the values up, because they're willing to pay big money for these houses just to get into Mendon. Both my sons are trying to do it right now, because they want to send their kids to this school.
You're absolutely right.
So,
That's what's happening.
And the taxes are still fairly low for, considering where a lot of these people are coming from, too.
Unless you're on a fixed income and that changes.
Yeah.
But we get,
No, I understand, but if you
Yeah.
compare it to other towns,
right.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Westboro, we've got somebody
Well,
that.
the initial snapshot, but if you dig a little deeper, what we get for our taxes doesn't justify it, correct? When you, we might be, it might look like we're paying lower taxes,
I think that
but what we're getting for those taxes,
as far as services.
Well, but a big part of what you're getting is a really high-quality school district, but if you don't have kids there, you're not getting it anymore.
and what it's doing is it's making the town side suffer.
exactly.
And just to throw out some more numbers if there weren't enough, based on the budget spreadsheet that Kim has put together so far, you know, the current budget, our regional, subtotal of the regional school district,
237 and change.
current budget is $10,091,575. What I'm seeing here, the new requested total, $11,378,379, an increase of $1,286,804. And to plug it into the budget with what we have, we can come up with 237,490 versus 1,286,000. So we're over a million apart with what we have that we can give in the budget and what's being
Yeah,
asked.
we're aware of that. I've got the number from Kim.
But I just
Yeah.
what I'm trying to just throw the numbers out there because it's being recorded, it's gonna go out, I want
Yeah.
everybody to know. If, with the budget the way it is, without cutting town side services, we can't cut salary, but without eliminating positions or cutting back roads or any of those other issues, you know, we're over $1 million short from your ask.
And I guess, and again, to kind of go back to this piece that, you know, with potential cuts, and you could see what, you know, the potential cuts would mean, you know, all of these very negative deleterious effects would go into place, you know, with regard to reduction of programs, fewer support for some of our kids who have the greatest needs as far as learning. I think we'd kind of go back to the future with regard to our user fees for our sports programs. And, you know, if you've just paid attention, you know, in the last 3 or 4 years, you know, we've got this guy, Chris Schmidt, who's been our athletic director, who's really done a tremendous job with the program, particularly at Nipmuc, and just building a culture of success and a culture of winning. Very, very positive. So obviously, you know, other things that would be, the pieces that would be cut would be instructional supplies, technology, and then I also do have a real concern with regard to the accreditation status of Nipmuc based upon that library media specialist position. So, you know, again, I see this as very analogous to 2015 in the sense that I think the district really is at a significant inflection point once again. I think, you know, you don't have to go very far in either direction to see what happens in communities like Uxbridge and Northbridge next door. You know, as I shared with the regional school committee, we have now 169 kids choicing in, okay? That's quite a few, and it's good and it's helpful to our budget. Realize something like 129 of them are Northbridge and Uxbridge kids. There's a reason for that. There's a reason that, based upon the level of support and the quality of education in those two communities. You know, all of you guys realized what happened in the years from '09 to '11, you know, with, you know, failed overrides. Yes, it was in the height of the Great Recession, but, you know, when I took over in 2011, the statistic that I remember is between those years of '09 to '11, the district literally lost 20% of its staff. 1 out of 5 teachers was not there. And I remember my very first year in 2011, the statistic was something like 35% of all classes at Nipmuc Regional had 30 or more kids in it. And again, that can happen very easily as far as a downward spiral.
What's the average size now?
Right now, it's at 23.
Doctor?
Yeah.
Can I ask a question? On the funding formula, and I assume the answer to this question is there is none, but is there an appellate process available to a district where you're dealing with a regional school district, you know, arguably an Orange up against an Apple, where you're dealing with individual school districts? Put another way, if hypothetically you were to say, well, if you broke the school district into 2 separate towns, would that result in a greater level of state aid? So here it is, you're being punished to some extent by the efficiencies that you have achieved.
You're making
regional district.
You're making a great point in the sense that, you know, going back to when the regionalization laws were written and then updated, it almost makes it like a divorce is almost impossible. my very first year, if you guys recall, back in 10, 11.
I'm not suggesting a divorce.
Right.
No,
What I'm
no,
saying is for the sake of
and I'm not
argument.
taking that, I'm
For the
not
sake
taking
of
that.
argument. To
But if
save
you
it.
guys recall, the Upton Selectmen actually approved a little subcommittee that investigated what it would look like to try to have Upton leave. And, they were actually working out the scheme that, Nipmuc would become Upton Middle High School, and we'd have to go back to the future with Misco, and it was crazy. And I met with the committee, and we met for 2 hours, and it died on the vine, because it was just insanity as far as, so I guess my long-winded answer to your question is, no, unfortunately, there is no appellate process. And in all likelihood, if we were to try to be the Mendon School District and then the Upton School District, you'd lose a ton of efficiencies. If anything, I think the natural fit would be bringing in Hopedale as well. I mean, how they're getting by with one tiny school district of 1,100 kids is ridiculous.
I think that we've reached out to them before on that.
Yeah.
Well, and it was kind of in that era. And
Yeah,
they
right.
Kind of were like,
I remember, right, yeah.
And
But I guess from your perspective, it would be a wash in any event, in the sense that even if you were to sort of break it hypothetically or make an argument if they're broken in half,
you'd be losing money elsewhere.
that as a practical matter, it would be a half a dozen or 6 of the other.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
That's helpful.
And we knew that this problem was coming, and we had talked to our legislators about, going in a different direction with this funding formula. And, on the state level, and it just, it sounded promising, and then when it came out,
And I'm going to be real frank with you, and I don't mind being recorded saying this. Whatever your political stripes are, don't you have a little bit of a problem when something passes both chambers of the legislature, both the House and the Senate, and it passes unanimously? Really? And again, I think there was such a fatigue and there was such a pressure to get this funding bill done. And again, the urban lobby, what is known as gateway communities, was the real strong voice in the room, and was the real, and as I showed, the overwhelming majority of the money is going to those communities.
But there's also, they're not fulfilling, the state is not really fulfilling their obligations in terms of the regional transportation.
That's another
policies.
piece.
and they never have.
And special education funding
And
and so
special
on.
education funding either.
That's-
And even
that's been-
out of district tuition to do with places like Norfolk Aggie. There's so many different reasonable fixes if they would just do what they said they were gonna do,
Yeah.
but they just.
That's been an ongoing problem
Right.
for 30 years.
Yeah, it hasn't changed.
At this point for us, or for all the communities like us, just get out of the school business altogether as the state and drop it down to the communities to deal with.
Yeah.
But Doctor, would it be fair to say that the communities in the represented legislature at the 82% threshold, to some extent, their vote almost frankly didn't matter, in the sense
Exactly.
of
Exactly.
they're maxed out anyway.
Exactly.
So there's nothing to be gained with a no vote.
Exactly.
Well,
It's only those communities that are below the 82 threshold, actually, that had skin in the game, as a practical matter, on that vote, right?
Exactly.
well, but if you think about it, our state reps our state rep covers Milford and Mendon.
Right.
So,
A lot more voters over there.
There was a
I'm gonna say there's a lot more voters in Milford.
And our senator covers Milford and
And-
Southbridge.
Right, absolutely.
There was a period many years ago, and I think it might have been your first or second year,
With John.
when John Fernandez was state rep, and he came to see us, and we were complaining about the exact
He
same
was
thing.
very polite,
And he
but-
But he basically said, look, Milford's getting less than their target share, you're getting more. I don't want to hear it. You got a great argument, but until they're where they should be, you're not going to get any more. And I kind of understand that. You got to spread it out and balance it evenly, but the bottom line is,
But it's not even, that's the problem.
yeah.
So,
And again,
It's apples
I do
and
not
oranges.
begrudge any community that's challenged. And again, we're up to now, to put things in perspective, how the communities change. And we're, granted, we're the little town of Mendon and Upton. My first year, we had 7 English language learners in our district. We're up to 42 now. So, it's changing. Some of the demographics are changing. I guess in counterpart, you remember what happened in 2015. And because, again,
Joe,
Yeah,
sorry,
Lonnie.
can I ask a quick question? When you have a student that's an English language learner, are these at all levels?
all levels across the board,
Okay,
42
so they come
kids.
here in 11th grade from Brazil and they can't speak a lick of English?
It happens every once in a while, absolutely.
And it's up to us to then provide,
It's state law.
Yes.
Oh.
The biggest language I think we provide support for is Arabic. It's
Yeah.
not Spanish, it's
We
not-
get a lot of run over from the Coptic Christian community in Milford. So the good news is when you get them early, like, when they're at Clough as first and second graders, that's good news. Like, they learn,
Couple
they
years,
learn
you're-
quick,
you're
and
all
it's like,
set.
okay, no more. The real tough part is when they come to you in high school.
Or for 8th grade.
Yeah,
7th
eighth grade. We had a kiddo come to us a few years ago from Colombia. Dad married a Colombian wife. They came over here. And he did not know, I think he started as a 9th grader. He did not know a single word of English. And the good news is, he ended up graduating. He ended up earning a seal of biliteracy. He's proficient in, obviously, his native language is Spanish, but also English by the time he graduated. But it's a lot harder process the older they are, which makes sense.
I guess that's great. I don't know. I don't know if that's great at all. I mean.
Well, yeah.
Great, great.
Well,
You know,
that's our job, is to help kids get educated. That's what we're supposed to do. And it
From
doesn't matter
another
where they-
country, we're supposed to provide that financially, not them
You know what?
making that decision to come here?
Not only
And-
that.
And they should be funding that as a special class.
We have to provide translation, not just for the students, but for the parents that don't speak.
Why?
English
Because we
as
just
well.
say yes and we accept it?
No.
Or we have to
By
try to
state
turn
law.
around and make some decisions as people and citizens around here to not just keep saying, oh, okay, we've made another state law.
well, I think that's what makes us great, United States, right?
I'm not saying,
I think,
as we're sitting here trying to talk about another $2 million override, and we have all these things that just keep pushing, and then progressing to another town that has so many of these students, that they're giving them all of the state funding. I mean.
But it's not
and
just
what-
that, it's the economic, it's the affluence of the residents of the town as well. It's not just, for us, ELL support is a small portion of our budget, very small. Special ed's a much larger
The good news,
support.
Lonnie, is, but it is 42 kids and it's 2 positions. That's the reality of the situation. But, again, with the community support, this is headlines over the last 2 years, 2 to 3 years, with regard to things that are happening, again, that are aligned with our strategic plan as far as thinking about the types of experiences, the types of kids, the types of knowledge, soft skills, hard skills, problem solving that we need for kids for careers of today and beyond. And again, just looking at some of the awards that we've received, again, Nipmuc being honored as one of U.S. News and World Report's top high schools in the country just last school year. So, and again, 2 times in the last 7 years, we've been, as a district, on the Advanced Placement or AP District Honor Roll. So again, our kids are doing well, in my humble opinion. I think our school district is doing very well, and it's because of the sustained support of our 2 communities. And again, it comes back to something that I'm very, very proud of, is we've been very consistent in mapping out a 5-year strategic plan, a blueprint. You know, in fact, Heather was part of a committee of about 35 parents, community members, educators, and even kids from the middle school and high school level that came together at the end of 2018 to put forward a blueprint of those exact types of skills and knowledge that we want for our kids. So, you know, again, we are fully cognizant that this is a big ask. I would at some point in the future, perhaps next month, be able to pull together the multi-board once again to continue the conversation. We had the opportunity at our school committee meeting of Monday to kind of develop some 5-year models, again, commensurate with our strategic plan. Back in the day, I want to say about 8 years ago, Rich Schofield put together some stuff along with Don Moran, who at the time was on the school committee. We think we've, you know, again, a 5-year model is never going to be perfect, but we feel like we've projected some numbers that are reasonable. But again, we view that our request is really critical, and we're going to be doing our best to communicate the need and the district's need for sustained support for our kids. So that's it. That's kind of the high-level view. I'd be more than happy if you have any additional questions to answer them.
Selectman Ryle has a.
Hey, Mark.
How are you?
Good.
So,
Sorry,
if I
Selectman.
remember correctly, in FY15 was the last override?
Well, it was 2015 for the FY16 budget.
Okay.
That's correct.
So, at that time, the main driver, or the biggest driver, and the reason why we absolutely needed an override was that our minimum local contribution, the operational additional is nearing zero. essentially.
Correct.
So we would have to provide some sum of money to meet our minimum local contribution. So in this case, that's not true, right? This is, we could give you zero, which would be terrible for your budget.
Absolutely.
Right? But the state wouldn't say,
Yeah, you're going to give it anyway.
you're not making your minimum local contribution. Because we give currently 1.7 million more.
Well, the no override amount for next year with that 237 increase, you'd be giving us 1.3 million more.
Right. But
Of the 2.8
I'm saying we're
million.
not gonna, next year, if we didn't give you a penny more,
You'd still cover it.
we wouldn't, in the state's eyes, we would not be.
Tell us to give more. State could make
So,
So I don't wanna make
That's the
it be that same argument as it was in 2015, because that's not the case.
Well, to be very clear, Mark, that was a component of the argument.
Right. And there was other
Strictly from a
things-
formulaic perspective.
Yeah.
I think part of the argument for this, very, very plain and simple, is about the future as it was in 2015. In 2015, yes, there were some additional programs and staffs added, very modest amount. But the overwhelming majority was to sustain class size, to sustain the programs and services that our kids are receiving.
And because
And-
many years went by that you hadn't had,
Correct.
It's just the current.
In a different way, because I think, Mark, you're asking if the
Gravel.
town is
I
required
have-
to
I have-
provide
You
an
can, on your,
this
yeah,
year,
okay.
for this coming year.
right. Yeah. Well, we are, but we
Yeah.
don't have to provide.
But there
He
is
doesn't
an
need
annual
payment.
contribution, correct?
yes, I know where Mark's going. So in 15, when we were doing the override, that was one component of it, is that if we didn't pass one, it wasn't going to happen that year, but within the next couple of years, you would no longer be able to meet your minimum. The same is true. If we don't do some kind of override in the next, if we don't do it this year, or next year or the year after, you're going to be in the same boat again.
And I'm not saying that it's not gonna come eventually, but I don't wanna say that, because at that time, that was one of the biggest arguments, is that, you know, we're looking at another year, and it gets pretty scary when you're at that point, when you're not gonna be able to even meet.
So let me counter that, though. The question is, let's say that's all you're meeting, and you don't have that additional, what is your school district then? What kind of education are you delivering? And it's not just about different programs and all the things that we've been able to accomplish. It's about just general basic education. You still have to do certain things for special ed. You still have to do certain things for a lot of different programs. Is that what you want the school
Well, that's
district
not,
to be? Is
that's
the
not the
bare
argument. I mean, the point that I think he's trying to make is back then, the situation was, not only
more
were we
pressing.
not there for the school, then if the state did step in and make us come up with that money, well, then we wouldn't have money to plow the roads, or we wouldn't
Correct.
be able to open the town hall up, or we wouldn't be able to patrol the streets with,
Yeah.
or have an ambulance to, I mean, that's really
I'm just
the,
saying, we're not there.
right, I know we're not there, but we
We're not even
would
near
have been, right,
that.
correct.
I
Right.
just want to make that.
And not to lessen the seriousness of this either.
Correct.
That what we're faced with and what the school's faced with, and like you said, you've already got people, I don't want to say they're not qualified, but they're not certified, doing like the
Media
library,
center.
which you
Correct.
said.
Correct.
Right. And then what happens if you lose that accreditation, and then what happens to the students that want to?
Well, my concern is, to put things in perspective, we track every year, and I think obviously on the town side you should do it as well, and I'm sure you do it, our BVT enrollment. And our BVT enrollment over the last 3 or 4 fiscal years has decreased by about 30 to 40 students, which is great. And I think some of that has to do with the success of Nipmuc. Believe it or not, I think some of it has to do with the success of Nipmuc athletic program. I mean, I have some soccer field conversations with parents, and they're like, hey, you know what? That soccer team's damn good, or, whatever. But to put things in perspective, and for those of you who have been around here, in the height of the recession, before the recession started in like 07, 08, we had 20 kids between the two communities, maybe 30 kids go to BVT, and then hell broke loose between 09 and 11, and it ballooned up by 2012, 2013 to just about 200 kids. And those are, it's a lot more expensive to pay for a BVT education than a Mendon Upton education. And again, I think BVT does a heck of a job. They're wonderful. But I think we also, through that era and to this day, you have some kids apply there, not necessarily because they want a career in tech education. They apply there for other reasons, because of the facility, because, you play a sport there. I think the user fee is like $30. It's a whole litany of issues, much more than, gee, I'm really interested in the plumbing trade or something to that effect. So, again, I passionately care about this district, about our kids, about the program that we put in, but I also know that the funding piece is super precarious, and that if we're not successful, and again, we have to execute cuts this spring, then what happens next year becomes progressively worse, and the ask becomes progressively larger.
So Joe, what's the answer?
Well, so,
You're doing a great job with the school.
Thank you, and I
There's
appreciate
no
that.
doubt about it. There is no doubt in anyone's mind that Mendon has a top-notch school district, largely due to your efforts and Jay's efforts and the townspeople's
Absolutely.
efforts over the years, and Upton. We have a terrific system. So, what's the answer? What's the answer?
If we want to continue it, it's going to cost more money.
I think also, though,
You have to say that.
I also think, though, it's I think it's a conversation about, so I haven't had an opportunity to check the numbers for Mendon yet, but I remember in 2015, giving the budget presentation, literally going into people's neighborhoods, into cul-de-sacs, and kind of, presenting. I must have given easily 25 budget presentations in the spring of 2015. But I remember the statistic that it was something like 94.1% of the tax base in Mendon is residential. And then you know, what the other 6% is Kevin. And it was 96.2% in Upton. And Kelly McElrath, who's the town clerk in Upton, said, "We got improvement, Joe. We're down to 95.9%. And I think part of the formula, and again, I think these are two great towns. I think people move here for a reason, probably a big reason, is the school district. And it's also kind of the still quiet and rural nature. But when you have a super limited tax base, as you do, all the onus falls on, you know, people who, the taxpayers. And, you know,
I mean, if I could add to that, I mean, we get it that our revenue stream is a fixed revenue stream. We've got state aid, which apparently is going to be zero or something, you know, no net increases. The towns can only raise 2.5% of their previous year. We get all that. There is no other source of money. It's not like you can sell more widgets or we can sell more widgets. We're all stuck. The only source of money is the taxpayers. And we understand that, and that's not a pleasant thing, and that's not something that people want necessarily. So the question is, what do you want for your town? What do you want to be?
Did you send me the override numbers, what they would look like per, on the different prices of homes?
I don't know if I emailed that to you.
About $1.20 or?
I have a taxpayer impact spreadsheet if it'll open up. So like in Mendon, based on information I got from Gene, say a $425,000 house, you're looking at about a $450 tax increase. And I have a chart down below. I can send this to you guys again. It's set up so you can put in an override number, put in a house valuation, it'll calculate everything out for you, so it'll tell you what it is. You know, it varies by the house, and there's the CPA surcharge separated out, so you know what those are. $250,000 house, it's like $264, something like that, 65. $800,000 house, it's $800.
That's for sure.
There's not many of those kicking around.
You know, your new house will probably.
No, I only have, it's only a small garage and two bedrooms.
Really?
So how much of the taxes, do we have any information on how much the taxes have gone up, just percentage-wise in Mendon over the last
10 years?
10 years?
So what I do have, I don't.
Not offhand.
About taxes, but I've done a FY12, I started this way back when I was in school committee in like 2000, but I've got FY12 to 20, each department in the town based on the FinCom report, what your budgets were and what the rate of growth is. And believe it or not, even including that override in 15, the school district is not increasing at any greater rate than any other town department. We're all in about 40% in that range with the exception of BVT, which is at 140%, but that's a different animal. We're all in the same rate, and the school district during that entire period has been approximately 50% of the town's budget, straight across the board, including the override year. So nothing has really changed dramatically on this.
I'd also like to add that you can't take one person's house and compare it to the next person's house as far as what percentages they might have gone up, because within a year, there's what we call a shifting that goes on also. And again, it's all governed by the buyers in town. 1 year, colonials might go up more than splits because the demand is greater. For instance, this year, the land prices on Kinsley Lane went up 15%. No place else in town did they go up that much. So there's that shifting that goes on. So when you're looking at that, you also have to have some, you know, flexibility as to how that shift is going to happen during the year. And of course, you know, 1 year I had splits go up like crazy because the people trying to get into town to go to school couldn't afford the colonials, they started to buy the splits but raised their, so it's just, or the raised ranches we call them, raised their value. So it's just, there's so many components involved in this. And we're at about 88% residential now.
Okay, which is a move in the right direction, right?
It's a move in the right direction.
Gene, we fair to say it's about a ballpark though? I mean, it's approximate?
Yeah, I mean,
Jay,
you know, we can't be going by
Of course.
neighborhoods, right, so
But
we
it's a
just
good-
basically
a
say
good ballpark
this is
for
how it's done.
Voters to
Right.
make a decision, to make an informed decision.
Well, this totals expenditures, but expenditures pretty much match revenues, right? Which is what you're raising, so over the 8 years, it's about, for the whole town, it's 41.26%, so divide that by 8, well, it's about 5% a year.
5%, yeah.
That would be helpful, I think, if you could circulate
Yeah.
that to us. Thank you.
I'm trying to get one for Upton as well. They kind of break their budget out differently, and I'd like to get that included so we have them both, because obviously we need to deal with both towns.
So it looks like there's some items, within the budget that are driving a lot harder than 5%, right? So healthcare, retirement, it looks like custodial services is up 10%. Are there certain items that are having a negative impact on the overall budget, that you're spending more over that period of time versus other items?
Special education.
Special education is a
always
big one.
driver.
For me, one of the things that I deal with now on a pretty much regular basis is building maintenance. I know it seems like we've got brand-new schools, but Nipmuc is now 20 years old. Misco was renovated, but Misco is, when was it built? Do you remember? It was like 1960. Yeah, it's an old building. Things are breaking down that have to get fixed that are going to be part of a capital issue, but on a daily basis, when you go to school, like you open up Memorial School one morning and the heat's not on, you've got to get somebody there to fix it. So that's been a driver as well. Part of this budget is some of the maintenance and custodial stuff. But, salaries is always a driver, although they're not dramatically increasing. They're not going up like by 8-10%. They're going up about 2 to 3%.
Yeah, we're in the third year of our last 3-year contract. The COLAs that we've given in this last 3 years were 2.15, and 2.25 this year. So I think they're generally market. I mean, Kim had the joy, where are you, Kim, of sitting in first negotiations session. They're reasonable. There's always the posturing and some of the things that go on, but for the most part, our associations get it, and they're reasonable in dealing with that.
So the biggest driver seemed to be, if I recall, insurance, which was
It's been a killer.
Health insurance has been a big ad.
12%. So can you go over how, and to follow up with Nick's, what's the options? Do you look at other providers every year?
We get comparative rates every year. And Harvard Pilgrim has always been the lowest. We went from a no deductible to $1,000 to a $1,500. We can explore the option of even going higher.
I'm just thinking, where I work, we've gone to the high deductible plan, and I think for the family, it's like around $5,000.
Right, so when we first introduced the deductible plan, we did the same thing that the town did. We pay the deductible, not the employee. When we went to the next step, I believe that's still how the town is working too.
Yes.
When we went from $1,000 to $1,500, I did an analysis, and it looked to me like we were going to save money. Turns out we pretty much broke even. We didn't really do any better. In order to make any changes, though, you've got to collectively bargain it. And our biggest challenge, quite honestly, is we have to offer by law HMO and a PPO. So the difference between the two is a PPO means you don't have to get referrals. That's the big difference, but they're much more expensive. I can't convince people that it is such a vast network that just making that phone call for a referral would be worth saving $5,000 a year, because they think if they pay more for health insurance, they're going to get better health care. So you're dealing with a lot of different parameters that play into it with a lot of people. We've got, I think I just put it together, we have about 300 or so people, including retirees, that are getting health insurance. It adds up. And so part of our increase this going into FY21 is that we had a lot of people this year, either maybe they had health insurance somewhere else, somebody got laid off, they took our plan. Maybe they got married and went to a family plan. Various things like that. And then health insurance companies look at what they call loss ratio. So they want to know how much they're spending and how much they're taking in, and they tell us a 12% buffer, in essence 12% profit. We were right at that. Actually, we were quite a bit below that, but now it took just one individual, claim that was $500,000, and now we're right back up in the low 90s again. So now they're going to want a rate increase, and it's just a gamble. So we bargained with it. So we found that this year we were actually under budgeted based on what we think our expenses are going to be because of the additions this year. So that's part of the increase for next year, is we've got to budget for what we have.
So, but you're saying that the employees don't pay their deductible?
They just pay active employees pay 25% of the premiums. The same plan the town of Mendon offers.
Yeah, I think, I know this is a broader conversation, but
Yeah.
that is not in line with any reality of the private
Quite
sector.
possibly.
It's just not.
Yeah. But you got to remember.
It's negotiated.
I understand, but I think, that's something that we need to think about if we're looking at kind of increased tax rates across the board for residents, is that the expectation that employees should be paying part of their deductible of their health plan. I mean, that doesn't seem to be an unreasonable request that we should be looking at as we think about.
So I'm going to give you the employee perspective on that, only because I've heard it enough. The employee perspective on that is that I'm only going to get X amount of dollars in a raise next year, and my premiums are going to take that away and then some, so I'm making less money next year than I made this year.
Right, but that's in line with, so.
In the private world, you don't have to negotiate it, you can just do it. We have to collectively bargain.
No, I understand, but on the employee argument, so when I cut my salary for the company that I have, I didn't get to now not have to pay my deductible.
Right.
You know.
Well, actually, you do, because it's your
Oh,
company.
yeah, maybe you're right. But, yeah,
I don't disagree with that, but it's easier said than done.
Right, and the other part is just being in these negotiations before, it's not something
Yeah, and
easily negotiated.
please be assured, we're aggressively looking
Yeah.
at a multitude of options for savings that we can find at every corner.
But I mean, transportation costs is a good thing to bring up as well.
Yeah.
It's the 86% over the last 5 years increase is pretty significant.
Right.
And what's problematic about that is that
There's no
for
competition.
right, but for a long time, that the state said that they would fund it 100%. Reimburse it
Well-
100%, and they just never do.
Hold on, the way it's written is funky. It
Yeah.
says.
Subject to appropriation.
No, I get that, right.
Right, so,
Big if.
the thing, in looking back, and I remember sitting in these, doing this before, when I was a selectman before, that, or even on the finance committee first, that this is always, this conversation really hasn't changed.
No, it never changed.
We've had this conversation around this table multiple times.
In the most part. And the fact that we are almost at that 82%, it's not, we were told it was coming. And we know we're gonna be there. And I think that the long and the short of it, we can sit and talk about the savings, we can talk about reasons for things the way that they are. At the end of the day, this is what we need to progress forward with the school. This is the amount of money it's gonna cost that's being requested, that the voters wanna vote for it.
That's right.
And if you remember, a year ago, the town did great by funding that full MLC increase, and it was a stretch on the town. I don't think there was much left.
Yeah.
But we said then, we would have had an override last year if we didn't do that. So we were trying to push everything off a year, but we knew that this was coming. I mean,
And the idea of
Doesn't
having
make it
this,
any better.
the idea of having this discussion, especially, again, Alex, thanks again for coming to record this.
Right.
It is being recorded so that all the townspeople can watch it, so they can get educated about this and understand just what Lonnie said.
Well, but I think too, just to add to that, Dr. Maruschak has had budget presentation after budget presentation after budget presentation on all the drivers for the budget. I have gone to most, not all, and there are 3 or 4 people
Right.
that attend,
Right.
including both towns. So the thing is, you've been presenting that information, it's publicly available. The district has been talking about it, the board has been talking about it, and I think, I don't know what I'm saying about this, honestly.
Lonnie's statement is correct. Ultimately, you put it to the voters, and they're gonna make a
No, but-
decision on what they want.
And which is,
right?
I think
It is what it is.
I think to even elaborate on what you're saying, most people's minds are already made up. They're either gonna vote for it or not. There's not a huge sell here. It's gonna be, it might be that grassroots type of campaigning that you need to do to go to the cul-de-sacs again to talk about it. I just, being here before, and you guys have all been here, I think almost everybody at this table has been pretty much here for the last, how long have we been, I don't even know how long we've been doing this.
Long time.
Right?
Well, I've been doing it for like 22, 23 years, and Mike's been sitting across from me for 22 or 23
Right.
years, I can tell you that.
So.
It's like that slide about 1995.
That was his class.
Yeah, that was Mike sitting in the front row.
Again, I just think that again, the voters are gonna be
Yeah.
the ultimate say, obviously the ultimate say.
And I think to Heather's point, it's about, I mean, how many people show up at your Board of Selectmen meetings, Lonnie? How many people ever show up to FinCom meetings and think about the important work that you're doing in which you're spending their money essentially.
Well, how many people come to the town meeting where we have, 100 people there and we're spending the entire town budget of,
Yeah. I mean,
19, 20 million.
With an override, with a school override, you're probably going to see a bigger town meeting. That's what history's taught us. To get to go through that passing process, and then when it hits the ballot, it's a whole.
But to your point, Lonnie, there's a core of people that no matter what you present, they're against it, and there's another core of people that no matter what you present, they're going to support it. There is a group in the middle that maybe needs more information, so that's what we have, that's our
they'll
job.
seek it.
Is it fair to say this is really, what you offer up here is to maintain existing services?
The overwhelming majority of it, correct.
Four new positions.
Yeah.
So if the math is correct on $500, and I accept it as true, $500 basically for the average home, you're talking $1.36 a day to maintain existing services here?
That's one way of looking at
That's the
it.
question before people? Really? $1.36 a day, and I'm not dismissing the fact that that's a chunk of change in the aggregate, but to maintain the educational system of the town, of the towns that we have in the district here, and to have that jeopardized for $1.36 a day?
24% senior rate. Senior, 24% of the population in this town is senior.
Yeah.
That number just came out the other day.
Yeah.
24%.
I guess I understand the whole
You were saying, of course you were
$1.36, hey, it's like 2 cups of coffee per week. I've been there, done that, bought the t-shirt.
That's bad, yeah.
But I guess I view it this way.
Yeah.
I was born and raised in the town of Agawam in western Massachusetts, and my mom is 81 years old. She's a widow. She's lived in the same house that I grew up in for now 50 years. And Agawam from time to time has the same challenges that we do here. And she's very much on a fixed income. She has my dad's pension and her Social Security check. But she also views it in the context of a social contract, in the sense that from the years, 1970 through 1984, I was educated through the Agawam Public Schools, and my older brother Dan was. And she views at what the value was, even if you were to prorate it from the 70s and the 80s, of the value of the education. She views it as paying it forward, that what she pays in taxes now, and when there's an override in Agawam, towards what was contributed during that span of 14 years when myself and my brother were educated in the public schools. I know that it's challenging for somebody who's on a fixed income, but I do see it as a larger social contract of the fabric of the quality that makes Mendon and Upton.
Agreed. It's the price we pay for a
Yeah.
civilized society.
I've also said to people come in my office who say, I don't have any kids in the school system, why do I pay that much? And I'll say, you may not, but those children are also your future.
Yeah.
When I'm laying in that hospital bed, when that person comes out, I want to make sure that doctor had a good education, or that lawyer had a good, so
Yeah.
they're all of our futures. So.
But I think that speaks to a larger issue. I think taxes are up just in general, right?
Yes.
We're paying more for things, taxes are up, our tax cut from the federal government has not been, at least in my case, a tax cut. People in the Northeast are penalized because of the taxes we pay, it's capped. This just increases, our overall tax burden. I make less money and I pay more taxes every year. I'm not talking just town of Mendon, I'm talking even federal taxes.
Right.
So I think, it's part of a larger conversation. I know I have friends that are really split on this. They love the schools, they want the schools to do well, they don't have an appetite for an override. Again, it's something that the voters will have to decide. I think it's, back to Joe's point about the strategic plan, I know Mendon in general has done a lot of planning, we have a lot of boards, we have a lot of studies on feasibility for XYZ, but it comes down to the idea of we don't have a big enough tax base. We are going to continue to run up against this problem. right?
So-
I mean, I guess until we hit the cap, it's still 82%.
We're still gonna have a problem.
Right, I mean.
Yeah, and the school's not gonna stop growing it once we hit the cap. It means just now that we're paying the cap plus. I think that, you know, the good things that we're progressing to in Mendon is that trying to build that commercial base a little bit bigger without overpowering the town with commercial base, because we don't necessarily want to be Milford. We don't want, I was funny, I was in the Home National Building today down by,
Far side of town.
across from Kohl's, and there's a real estate office there that it's all windows, and it just looked out over the intersection and everything that's happened there and what's happened there over the years, and just looking at it was just this hustle and bustle that I remember driving down there when I was a kid, and, you know, there would maybe be 5 cars down there. So just seeing that, and obviously that's not what the direction that Mendon would want to go in or what we're looking for, but our commercial base still we have a lot of growth potential here on the 140 side of town. Things are coming, and with the Economic Development Committee that we have, they're constantly looking at other ways to try to bring, you know, good low-impact business to town to help that. Right now, it's a lot of open space that is in the commercial area that isn't generating those kind of good taxes that we need. So I think that heading in that direction is really going to be helpful. Not that we're going to see any reduction in our taxes, they will just at least help to offset,
Spread it out.
and make it a little bit less.
That's a good point.
Right. Maybe reduce an override, or the fact that maybe we can put some money into stabilization for times like these, or we can have it for times like these.
You know, I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, I think ultimately there has to be, and I think it's a real challenge to be able to plan out multiple years. Yeah, in some ways it's great to have a strategic plan, but the whole financial plan that's commensurate with it to match up, that's a real challenge. I mean, you know that as well as anybody.
So Joe, 5 years ago, I believe you said this override that passed back then would probably last about 5 years. And your prediction was spot on.
I actually, for my budget presentation, I was on the phone, of all people, I was on the phone with Ed Thompson today. You guys remember good old Ed Thompson from WMRC, he's doing well. But we actually had, at the time, Diane Duncan, Phil DeSutter, and Lee actually went in, and we actually have an audio clip of them being, I think it was in May of 2015, saying, look, you know, we realize this is a big ask, but if this passes, we won't be back for 5 years. And to your point, Norm,
so my question is, what's your prediction? So if this override passes this fiscal year, what's your prediction?
Let's go with 6, because you didn't even need this one this year, but you found out you had said 5, so you had to commit.
Right, that's it. Yeah, that's the ticket.
It was actually 5, but last year you had cutbacks, so.
Yeah.
It should have been 4.
You know,
No, I'm just.
I think it's a really challenging piece in the sense that in non-override years, you know, we do everything in our power to find every possible efficiency, and sometimes things break for you. You know, we had, you know, I mean, you know, I'm only 25% Irish, but sometimes I really have the luck of the Irish in the sense that my first 3 years, we had 0% increases in healthcare insurance. That like saved us big time. And, you know, when you get breaks of people retiring and so on. So I think sometimes it's a little frustrating that, again, in thinking about your strategic plan and thinking about what you want to do, being able to add incrementally, but if you know that there's, you know, always this fixed number of revenue from the formula of, okay, half of the 2.5 levy increase and half of new growth, it's a super challenge. But we do everything in our power, you know, to make it work, to work with both communities. I mean, part of the dual-edged sword around lack of engagement is when I got hired in January of 2011, and I'll never forget, I went to the first few school committee meetings, you know, that my predecessor was with, and they were in the MISCO gym, and they were packed, and people were screaming, and it was a nightmare. And again, I like the budgeting process to be drama-free as possible. I want engagement, but I don't want histrionics. And so it's a challenge.
So do you think so I think it's an important question, though, how long this, if it passes, might it last? Because that was important to me 5 years ago.
I think the game plan would be a similar time frame.
Okay.
Because, and realize, as a regional school district, and I'm sure the committee members could weigh in on this, we're also very realistic about the demands on the community. And there isn't this, demand that, okay, we're going to just come back and ask for an override every single year, devil may care, no, that's not our mindset. But we're also, again, as I said, really at a critical inflection point. And again, the challenging piece is, okay, this could fail, and we could be executing big cuts, but it's also my responsibility as the superintendent, in part with the school committee, to advocate for the best possible education for our kids. And I guarantee you, if this were to fail, the request will come back next year, and it'll be substantially larger because we'll have those cuts and then some to make up.
So you have cuts and you're just kicking the problem down the road.
Pretty much.
basically, so.
And again, to remind you to go back to 09 to 11, when the district lost approximately 20% of its staff, all the negative effects of kids choicing out and kids accessing BVT and other options, I strongly believe that those things would come to fruition again.
Okay. Well, thank you for.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right. I think does anybody else have any questions? All right. And I'm gonna adjourn the meeting. Thanks.
Motion to adjourn?